Hello and welcome to your surface texture demonstration. So just to point out a couple of things, I did add in my cast shadows here, over here as well before starting in on this next phase. And so I did use my light source like a vanishing point. I taped it and then lined up the angle coming from the light source. Okay, so for surface texture, you can also use this in the sky, especially if you don't have a lot of sky, you don't want to do puffy, fluffy clouds like I've drawn out. I'm going to use my practices just to kind of show you, and then I'm going to actually put it in my distant sky. Okay, so let's say I have this bird's eye sketch. I'm going to use old school wooden pencil, or you could use 2B. I wouldn't use 6B because, again, you want your darker values to be, like if this were my drawing, I want my darker values in this building and probably darker values more up top, fading down to lighter. Or if this were my actual drawing, I would go a little bit lighter in the ground still, even though the center part is the focal point. So you want the focal point to have the most texture. Okay. So I would keep it fairly horizontal or parallel to your horizon line. So this horizon line is horizontal. So it's very similar to what we did in still lifes and self-portraits, where I'm going to hold my pencil horizontally so I can use the whole side of the graphite. And I'm going to kind of go a little bit bigger and more spread apart to smaller and lighter and closer together. So you want to kind of pull away from whatever detail you have. So I'm going to add a little bit extra. And then I would probably just use the bigger blender, or on your final draft, you could use tissue. So you could just wrap tissue around. So I'll show you that part on my final draft. So with any texture you're going to do, it's the layering that's the most important part. So the more you layer, the better it's going to look. And you can layer in some of your mark making as well. So mark making can be layered into a subtle texture, whether it's in the sky, on the surface. Okay, so it's kind of like pulling, adding, and then subtracting. So we call it like push and pull kind of an art, where I'm going to then, especially areas like I got a little fingerprint there, I'm going to erase that out. I'm going to erase more towards the vanishing point, keeping it horizontal. So turn your paper so your arm is comfortable. Then I would go back in and add some more defining areas, especially more towards the front. Okay, and pull a little bit away. Blend again. You can definitely use tissue for this. This would be similar to doing water as well. And then I would, if your vanishing point would create shadows in the water. So if you're interested in doing that, just look up like reflections in perspective, and you probably get some reflections in water. Then I'd probably do like one more layer, especially closer to the viewer. And I'm kind of looking at like how much detail do I have in those buildings that are closest. And if you like this way that this looks, you could go over it with a little bit of pen in the foreground, or you could leave it. You could totally just leave it. Probably erase out another layer. So it's the layering. And then if I wanted to, just in the front, like holding my pen in the middle, I could go over it to enhance a little bit. So that's just a subtle texture. It's an easy way to use your space. Okay, so on this side, what if you want it to be lumpy, bumpy, or look like little kind of hills or something? So I'm going to turn my paper so my arm is comfortable, but I'm keeping in mind that it should be like, you know, parallel to the horizon line. So it's kind of like scumbling, where it's like controlled scribbles, or if you want to do bushes or trees. And then as something textured gets further away from you, it becomes less textured, and it eventually would look like would look like it does over here. So it becomes horizontal. Everything becomes more horizontal the closer to the horizon line it gets. And that's why your horizon line is horizontal, even though the land is not flat by most people's standards. Okay, so then I would just kind of blend in the direction of your texture as best you can. It's all about the layering, so you kind of build up your layers. And if you wanted to, you could do some scumbling, like the controlled scribbles. So let's say I did want a tree. So your trunk would line up with the third vanishing point. And then, of course, the tops of them would line up with that vanishing point. So definitely blend that. And I would even take my eraser and kind of blot and pull it back out. And I would kind of add in, especially the trunk that's closest, add in another layer, probably like tap blend, and then you can pull back out. So the more you add, the better it's gonna look. So over here, then also kind of keeping in mind, like, where's my, where's my light source? So if the light's coming from this side, then I would have this ground be a little bit darker. Okay, so over here, I'd probably come back, do another layer. I would say at least 2 to 3 layers if you're just gonna do subtle texture. So some other subtle textures you can do. I'm gonna save this one for the grass demonstration. But let's say I'm gonna do this ground here. So I could also do somewhat kind of like stippling, but I'm gonna start with like larger kind of horizontal streakiness like I did, making sure they kind of line up, get close together, lighter as it gets further away. So this is pretty much hatching in a way. You can mix some of these. So I could do hatching with scumbling, or maybe I want to do hatching with stippling. And so instead of stippling, like taking forever using the tip of your pencil, I would maybe like, let's say I have my light source coming from here, and I'm going to do a cast shadow, and also so this would all be darker over here, but really dark right underneath. Well, then maybe, especially where it's closer, I can use the side of the pencil like take your time if you're gonna do like the speckled effect, and then I would blend over that. And then same thing, it's like pushing and pulling, so adding in and subtracting. So in that stippled effect, I am on top of the newspaper. Probably if I'm gonna erase out, I'm gonna pull it off of newspaper. So you can have just like a subtle kind of speckly effect that gives it texture. If you have block or stone, that also looks good on block or stone. And so, okay, so my light's coming from this side, so therefore I'm gonna erase more out on the light side and some where that shadow isn't. And I would add more lines and more speckliness in that cast shadow. Kind of fade out. Okay, so that's some subtle kind of texture. Remember, I would do 2 or 3 layers. So I'd erase out, I blend again, I'd erase out, blend again, and then if you want to go back and add another layer, you can. So some subtle texture is, you could also Google textures with pencil. Okay, so this is all sky for me. This is all sky with clouds. This is all sky, but I have the mountain, so then this is the sky that's really far away. So I'm gonna do that horizontal texture. I'm gonna show you how to be like really careful going around stuff. And I need something to go underneath my hand. I'm just gonna flip over my mark making sheet because that has only pen on it. And my light source is coming from the right, so therefore I'm gonna go a little bit darker on the left, but still very light because I wanna push it back in space visually. I'm gonna start kind of outside of my border, some long, some short. Being careful around my subject matter. Add a little bit in between. Okay, so for something this large, I would probably use tissue at least once and then maybe go back. Or if you're comfortable using just this blender and you don't like using the tissue, just make sure that you're getting clean edges and going right up to the edge. And then of course, if I get it into my shaded structure, I'm gonna erase as I go. So I'm kind of cleaning it up as I go. So you want it to be really, really subtle. So I would go back and I would erase out, kind of keep some of the areas a little more horizontal. I would add a little bit more. I would blend again. So the more you add, the more you layer, the better your texture is going to look. And you can definitely use some of these with pencil to create textures. Or my fallback is, if it's horizontal, go horizontal. If you wanted like a vertical, like you want a horizontal ground and vertical background, that's okay as well for some contrast. All right, your next video is going to be on adding mark making to enhance your focal point. So I'm gonna finish that part and then I'm gonna add mark making in the next video.